views expressed are those of the host, guests, and callers, not necessarily those of News Radio 1040 WHO.
Good morning, friends. Welcome to our Monday morning get-together. Mickelson here with you. We're going to talk politics for a while. This is the season. So we're going to talk with Congressman Tom Latham. He wants his job back, and he is here today to talk to us about issues, and I suspect the economy is going to be number one on his mind. Later, we're going to talk with some people who, in spite of the political meltdown, are still bugged about the state's banning of their chosen vice, smoking. They would like the state just to take their rules and amend them. Yeah, that's it. And that's we're going to talk with an organization that's going to be pummeling the guys over at the State House as soon as they can. Because if the state doesn't amend the rules, these guys promise to amend the people who are representing us. Literally, they give them the boot. They're bugged about having to go smokeless at places like bars and bowling alleys and the VFW places like that. Congressman Latham, thank you for joining us this morning.
It's great to be with you.
Put that cigarette out, please.
Yeah, right. Happy Columbus,
you can still spit.
Columbus Day.
Yeah, thank you very much. Did you ever study him very much? Because they're even trying to denigrate his contribution to the West.
Well, certainly as far as in history in school.
Yeah.
And, as the founder or the discoverer of North America.
Yeah, if you dig deeply enough into his background, he's probably really the one who's responsible for the bailout problems.
I think there's plenty of blame to go around.
Well, let's just leap into that because last time I talked to you, just last week, this was an important moment in congressional history. You guys were invited to say yes or no to a $700 billion, I think it was more than that, wasn't it, by the time it's done?
It ended up to be nearly $850 billion, yeah.
And everybody was kicking that around. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And you and one other congressman, a member of the Iowa delegation, said no.
Right. Yeah, Steve King and I both voted no on both proposals. The vote we had on Monday, it failed. And then, of course, typical Washington, if you add another $150 billion on top of the $700 billion, that apparently makes it better. And
because those were passing pre-existing earmarks? Was that ratified?
Well, it had some tax provisions in there, the toy wooden arrows and the rum for Puerto Rico and things like that.
Weren't those pre-existing earmarks, though, and just reauthorizing them or something?
Most of them were extensions of current tax policy, right. And some of them were good. There's no question about it. But, to add that onto a bill, the $700 billion bailout, with no control anywhere. I mean, the Secretary of Treasury came up to Congress with a 3-page piece of legislation, said, give me $700 billion, don't ask any questions. Mm-hmm. And that part of it really didn't change. There was some transparency, but there's no teeth as far as oversight. There's no way to stop them.
That emerged exactly that same way. Is it still judgment-proof? I mean, judges can't even, courts can't even intervene at this moment?
That's correct.
And it survived that way.
Right. Now, they did take out the ACORN provisions and what they call the tamp-down provisions, which was basically to empower trial lawyers to be able to go to court and sue on an individual basis and get the terms of loans changed. But, $20 billion going to ACORN, that was taken out. And we've seen what ACORN is doing around the country as far as this was Nancy Pelosi's, and the Democrat leadership wanted to stick that part of it in, but that was taken out.
See, there's a couple things I don't understand in this whole process, because if the government is going to take over they call it toxic debt, mm-hmm. and then the Treasury is on an individual basis going to figure out a formula to mark down the equity, the true value of the house to renegotiate loans. With the people who are living in the houses that can't afford them at the moment. Why do we need the Treasury for that? Why couldn't we just stand underneath the banks who would have a better idea, or who already have pre-existing expertise in that area? Why do we have to draw the entire map?
Well, the way it's proposed, I mean, the Treasury Secretary can do anything he wants to with the $700 billion. And, a lot of the problems, actually, that we've been trying to fix recently have been directly related to some of the actions taken earlier,
right.
Such as when people started pulling money out of money market accounts. Then Treasury said, well, we'll guarantee all money market accounts. Then there started a kind of a run on banks, and so then we had to raise the FDIC insurance level to $250,000
right.
to protect banks. And when they took over Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, with the stroke of a pen, Jan, they wiped out about $35 billion of equity with people who own preferred stock and common stock. And the preferred stock for our banks on Main Street here was an approved capital asset. The auditors, the state examiners all said, well, if you own preferred stock in Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, that's fine for your capital requirements. Well, with a stroke of a pen, $15 billion of that was just erased that banks owned. And so now we're having to come back again and try to fix the problem because there's not enough capital in the banks. And it's just crazy. We're trying to fix problems that were caused by the government action to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, because those were capital losses for assets for banks, they were not deductible against earnings, so they had to change the rules so that now you could deduct the capital losses against earnings at banks.
Deduct them from what?
From
the
their
tax
earning,
liability?
Yeah, from the bank's earnings.
Before,
okay.
Got it.
The capital was just gone.
You're talking?
Wiped off.
Are you talking about the mark-to-market provision?
No,
is that something else?
This is, a bank has to have capital reserves,
right,
and a percentage, usually 8-9%. And so what we've got,
unlike Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac,
right.
They didn't have to have a stinking
but
thing.
The preferred stock that the banks held was an approved capital asset for the banks to meet their capital requirements.
Are we talking about stock in real estate mortgages, or are we talking about literal stock securities that they had purchased using depositors' money?
They, as capital assets, can purchase, or were allowed before it was approved by the auditors, that they could purchase Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae preferred stock.
Preferred stock, meaning they bought securities that were derived on subprime mortgages.
It was an approved capital asset.
Approved by
the auditors, by the federal examiners. And so they could meet their capital requirements, and then with the stroke of a pen, they wiped out those capital assets.
Okay.
So banks then had to come back with more money to meet their
because they no longer had the reserves that they previously had.
Right.
If they could have these phony assets on their books.
Right. Exactly.
So in essence, they just had to clean up their books, and when they cleaned up their books, we found out what their true condition was in.
Right. And Secretary Paulson, I asked him directly. I said, how can you worry about capital in banks and financial institutions when with a stroke of a pen you wiped out $35 billion of capital, but they did make the bondholders good, places like Russia and foreign investors who held bonds in Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, but they wiped out all the stockholders, any equity. That is gone, just vaporized overnight.
Is that in addition to the loss on the stock market? Is that of 18% of more than $1 trillion?
Right. Sure.
Is that the same? Are we talking about the same loss or a different phase of the loss?
No, we're talking about a different action when the government came in and took over Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and took 80% ownership. They erased all value of stock.
Okay. All right. Because I don't have a head for this kind of stuff. I'm happy you do. But isn't it one of the reasons why the value of the stock diminished is because the real estate market had gone south, and with it, the mark-to-market provisions had to go into place, which further put the thumb on the scale. The banks had to, instead of listing the mortgage value of a house, had to list the potential sales value of the house. And if nobody's buying in real estate at the moment, that's zero.
That's exactly right.
Well, is that a realistic?
No.
Is it all right? So isn't that one bad administrative rule causing a cascade effect?
Absolutely, and that goes back to Sarbanes-Oxley, the legislation that put that accounting practice into place.
That was in a response to Enron, as
right,
I recall.
Exactly.
Another con from a few years ago.
And
why did they do that, by the way?
Well,
why did they see that as a response to Enron, which was the nature of that fraud? What was the?
I think the idea was to supposedly have real valuation, and as long as real estate values were going up, it actually overvalued a financial institution's portfolio or an investment. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac.
So what caused the bubble to burst? Was it the entire summer of paying $4 a gallon for gasoline killed off the economy? People started losing their jobs, couldn't pay for their houses.
I think you can put a lot back on the high price of energy. There's no question about it, how it stretched families' budgets, but also the fact that people were put into homes, and predators out there, as far as lenders, out there trying to have people buy homes with and would not even check their ability to pay, their credit history, but this was government policy also with Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, that 50% of
because
their
housing
loans,
is a right.
Right, but 50% of their loans had to be in the subprime market because we were doing housing became a social project in essence.
So let's go back and start over. Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae started, I think, back in the Johnson administration. They started this, as I recall the story, as a response to the economic devastation to the economy by the Vietnam War. The Vietnam was screwing up our economy, and they were trying to stimulate the housing market again. So they invented these two agencies, which I think they went public back then. Mm-hmm. And they began to try to use government money, printed money, in order to stimulate the economy, because Johnson, pretty much doing like every president has done since, has done guns and butter. Tried to expand the welfare net, safety net, while fighting a war at the same time, devaluing the currency. Those agencies came into existence, and slowly, over the last couple of generations, the last generation rather, the mission was expanded, the rules were liberalized, the missions, the agencies were captured by special interest groups, and a couple of started by a Democrat welfare state, Johnson, expanded even further under the Democrat welfare state, Clintons, ignored and not particularly well managed by Bush, but whose attention was on the war.
Right.
And now we have this generational transfer of wealth, unlike anything in human history before.
Absolutely, and don't forget in 1977 when Jimmy Carter signed the Community Reinvestment Act that told banks that they had to make loans. There was geographic supposedly, but it forced banks, if they wanted to keep their charter, they had to make loans to folks who could not repay.
So this summer,
but then they could sell them to Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and get them off their books.
So another wrinkle was something that happened in 2000 and a couple other different wrinkles. They began to sell insurance on the hedges, on these securities. The credit swap deals came into existence. Now, where you could literally, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm over my head already.
You can't call the credit default swaps insurance, because if it was insurance, they would have been regulated.
Yeah, okay,
these are outside bets, basically.
Literally bets.
Right. It's like you and me buying insurance on a car going down the street here.
Yes.
We have no interest in it, but we're betting whether or not the guy's going to make his payments on the car.
I was just reading the enabling legislation on that. It happened in 2000. It's a Commodity Regulations Act. I wonder if most Iowans are aware that one of the co-sponsors of that legislation, Senator Harkin. Do you know that? There's actually a provision in that says that this cannot be considered gambling. Exactly.
And come under the law.
This is
laws
yes.